Welcome everybody to Axioms on Trial on the very first take of this episode. Definitely not multiple takes. That didn't happen. No, I'm just kidding. Welcome everybody. We had some issues with StreamYard. I do apologize about that. If it happens again, we'll figure it out and we'll go for a third time. Cease might know what the problem is. We'll see if that happens, and then I'm gonna feel like an idiot. So, but today we have a David on. If you haven't seen any of the past episodes, he's come on. We've talked about a couple different topics already, so go back and check those out if this interests you. I'm going to actually pass it to David before pass it to Cease, so that you can introduce what it is that your background's in for potential new viewers that have not seen those episodes.
Yes, I'm a physics professor and I study black holes.
Nice, short and sweet. I love that. Cease, so yeah, if you want to kind of chime in on what we're going to talk about today, and then I guess we'll get straight into it.
Yeah, we're going to discuss the Kalam argument. We're going to go over some of the Thomist perspectives, the 5 proofs, and possibly touch on fine-tuning as well. We'll see how much time we have to go over all this stuff, especially with all the technical issues we've been having. Hopefully we won't run into any more issues, but just stick with us. We'll figure things out.
Yeah, apparently $25 a month for StreamYard is not enough for a service that works well. But maybe we'll go to the pro. It's like $100 a month, and maybe that'll fix it. I don't know. It seems like robbing money out of our pockets. But anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. The last clip, if you were in the last one, since time's kind of cut short, that was like a 10-minute video. I found another one by Dr. Craig that's more like a cartoon synopsis, about 4 minutes long. So we'll do that one. It presents the premises. David's not like, I don't want to mischaracterize you, but you're not somebody that typically goes and looks for Kalam cosmological arguments, right? You stick pretty much to the science about these things. So that we're for not the first time, but we're kind of introducing this to David in some respects and getting his first opinions on it from his professional background. So that'll be kind of the exercise there. And I'll go ahead and pull up the video. It will have some lagging issues at the beginning here, but it should fix itself.
Can you hear it okay, Dave?
Yeah.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause.
Does anything in that premise 1, whatever begins to exist as a cause, premise 2, the universe began to exist, and then conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause. Like what would be your first kind of gut feelings when you hear that?
The second assumption. I'm not sure that people agree with that.
Okay, so you would like immediately you'd be like, okay, maybe I could concede premise 1 and then move to 2. That's kind of where.
No, I would say that ultimately that's not a good idea either.
Sure,
but I think it's a different kind of argument behind that.
Gotcha, 100%.
So I don't think 1 or 2 are very good.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on the reasons why?
Okay, so the universe began to exist. The notion of beginning of time, there's some tension there between that idea and the laws of physics, and what people do about that is sort of all over the place. But I can give you what I think the lesson. Well, there are certain things that you look at the laws of physics and say, oh, this is telling us something, is trying to teach us something. And I think there are certain features of the laws of physics that are incompatible with this idea of beginning, and these are important. Other people will sort of put them aside and say, I'm not really sure what their arguments are, but they'll say things like, despite the laws of physics, time has a beginning, and we can see it from somewhere else. and I don't know how they square it with the tension that I think is there. So that's a short version of my answer to that.
Yeah.
For number one, cause and effect are emergent properties, and when you look more fundamentally, they disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Those concepts disappear. So you don't really want to talk about cause and effect. You sort of talk about things existing in some kind of relationship with each other, and this connects again to the laws of physics.
So you'd be saying that on a base level, from that kind of causal relation standpoint, that when you kind of zoom in, so to speak, in some aspect,
right.
you're going to kind of lose the fabric of what that even means.
Yes, right.
Sure. Yeah, I think those are pretty square on points.
So to those that would say that science operates on the concept of cause and effect, you would just say that that's a mischaracterization?
No. I mean, that's perfectly fine, but it's at a certain level. When you look at things at a certain level, cause and effect is a great thing, and it's most of science deals in terms physics deals with cause and effect, but it's an emergent kind of relationship, right? We talk about macroscopic objects, and we're dealing with Newton's laws. I throw the ball to you, you catch the ball. It's certain laws that govern that kind of behavior, and the conversation in terms of cause and effect is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to, we're trying to discuss something that's very deep in terms of the nature of reality, right? And so you want to look more fundamentally. And so I think you need to look at physics more fundamentally. And when you do that, you notice that these things start to disappear.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Cease, anything else you want to touch on before we go on?
Yeah, my reaction to that is several. One, that we don't witness things beginning to exist. We see changes in matter, perhaps. We see different configurations of things. We don't see something coming to existence in the way that he's claiming. And
just an empirical fact, right? You're saying.
Yeah, like we don't see things just come into existence, right? Like we see changes in matter, but I'm not aware of actually witnessing things coming to existence. I mean, I've heard something about certain kind of particles that seem to appear, but I don't know. I don't really understand.
So the creation and annihilation of particles. So energy, you can say energy is a conserved quantity, but it can appear in different forms. So you can have certain kinds of particles that then interact and then disappear, but that energy is still there. And so in a sense, it's the energy that hasn't come from nothing.
Right.
Whereas the particles, in a sense, do begin to exist.
Okay. I actually have a lot on this specific thing, so I'm really glad that you brought that up, Cease, and your response there, David. So would you say to like some degree that there's these kind of like an appeal to the phenomenon of quantum indeterminacy, where like the causal principle is going to be breaking down at the subatomic level, and that be an objection essentially to the first premise?
No, I don't think I really see that. I think I agree with Cease that when we look at these processes, there's a continuation of some kind of quantity. I don't know that when we again. I mean, I'm not a particle physicist, so the extent to which you want to talk about things coming from nothing. There's a book about this. I don't think you're really talking about nothing. There's always a something, and that something leads to things having different forms. I think that's really the kinds of conversation you want to have. So I think I agree with Cease's observation that there isn't just as an observational fact evidence for things just suddenly appearing out of nowhere. There's a continuation of some sort. What that continuation looks like might be complex, but you can identify it.
There's a philosopher, Quentin Smith, I believe, but he kind of, well, I guess it would be touch on Krauss's idea here of the, I guess what would call the quantum vacuum, right?
Right.
And so I think it's Quentin that goes into virtual particles where them like kind of appearing and disappearing would be something to consider within that first premise. Craig rejects that. I have a quote from him if you're interested in why he would, but I'd be interested in like what you think about that in regards to the.
Well, if Craig rejects that, it seems like he rejects the idea of things just coming into being, right?
Well, so his response is that the phenomena originating from the quantum vacuum cannot be described as uncaused, and so the direct quote is, "For virtual particles do not literally come into existence spontaneously out of nothing. Rather, the energy locked up in a vacuum fluctuates spontaneously in such a way as to convert into evanescent particles that return almost immediately to the vacuum."
Okay, right. There are principles that need to be obeyed and can't be violated. So isn't that making the case that things don't just appear out of nowhere?
Yeah, when I read it, it struck me, and that's why I kind of referenced it to, because I was like, I don't know how I don't have a background in any of this by any means, but when I read it, I kind of had a similar thing where I was like, I don't think it's doing the work or his objection, I don't think is doing the work that he thinks.
I think you quoted Craig as he's worried about cause and effect. He's interested in causes and effects.
Yeah,
and he's dealing with that argument there. So I think maybe that's separate there.
Yeah, he's saying that the phenomena originating from the quantum vacuum cannot be described as uncaused. I think is his object. Hopefully that's what I'm characterizing as, right? But yeah, do you guys want to?
Yeah, let's see what he says about infinity and stuff.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Is the first premise true?
Oops.
Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician.
Now, I just have to pause that because this is better because there's a person and that there and you can pull nothing out. I don't know. That's something weird to me to reference, but it's weird. Not an intelligent point to really care about.
And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin? Or has it?
All right, so I guess we could do this the same way we did it with the first one. Kind of go over the second premise here before they kind of elaborate, or would you rather kind of hear them and then we do that? What would you guys want to do?
Well, whatever you want, it's fine.
Okay. So you kind of struck a flag, or I feel like you kind of planted a flag there earlier about the second premise with the assertion that the universe began to exist.
You want me to elaborate on what I had said before?
Yeah, I guess also what are some of the different models that explain the origin of the universe?
Okay, so there are models that suggest the universe had a beginning, and there are models that don't have that feature. The universe is eternal. So these possibilities are all still on the table. Right? So one can just point that out. And the question is, how do you distinguish? I sort of have a preference because I think when you look at laws of physics, certain things certain things pop out, and that's my position. But at the end of the day, as I've said before, it doesn't matter what my preferences are, and these things haven't been determined. But when you can't then say the universe exists. The second premise, the universe began. You can't affirm that, right?
Yeah, and I don't know. Oh, sorry, Cease, if you're in.
No, I heard something about a model that describes the universe as neither having come into existence nor being eternal because it looks at the notion of time differently, not as a straight line, but as, I think I heard it described almost like a circle. Like there is no beginning point to a circle. It's just sort of self-contained, and it might look at the universe in that sense, where it didn't come into existence, but it also doesn't keep going back to infinity. It sort of wraps around itself.
Okay, now I'm not sure what model you're referring to, but you're getting at what I think is a fundamental lesson that we should take away by looking at how time appears in the laws of physics, and what you notice in these laws of physics is that describing everything in the universe seems to involve cycles, right? And so you mentioned the circle, and so all of the physical, the forces of nature, they seem to require, to give you a simplified version of this, you can basically describe the fundamental laws of nature in terms of the pendulum, right? So the pendulum is a little object of mass that you attach to a string, and you attach it to the ceiling, right? And then you let it, you pull it to a side, and it's going to oscillate because gravity pulls it down, right? Mm-hmm. So this pendulum continues to cycle through states that it was in before, in a rhythmic fashion, and so you can sort of that kind of feature is at the heart of the laws of physics, and so cycles are everywhere in physics. And so it would be a little strange for all the fundamental laws of physics to have cycles at their foundation, and yet to see that the universe that's made of these laws doesn't share that feature. Okay, so when you start to look at the universe as a whole, you start to notice certain things that don't seem like patterns, but the idea would be that you're looking at things sort of locally. So it's kind of like going back to the pendulum. If I pull the pendulum to the side and let it go, right, and you observe this motion, the ball goes lower and lower and speeds up, right? Mm-hmm. And if you stop there when it gets to the lowest point, then there's clearly an asymmetry between the two processes. You know, if you in one way in time you're evolving and you're speeding up, and the other way you're slowing down.
You're saying like an oscillation between the two in some respect, or so how you would...
When you look at the whole process, if you wait long enough, right, the pendulum will just start oscillating back and forth, and the past and the future are exactly the same. Mm-hmm. It's just repetitions of cycles. You know, if you make a movie of a pendulum and you play it backwards, you can't tell the difference, right? You come into my movie theater, I play you the movie, you can't tell me if I'm playing the movie backwards or forwards. Sure. All of the laws of physics have this feature that you can play at the fundamental level. You make a movie of physical processes, and you play that movie backwards. There's nothing strange. You can't tell that it's been played backwards. But the universe as a whole, on large scales, right, in our everyday life, if you imagine that kind of thing, it doesn't seem to apply. Okay, so when you make a movie of cars in the street and so on, and you play it backwards, it's clear that something's different, right? Cars are going backwards. That doesn't seem to make any sense. You seem to be violating the laws of physics. Well, the short answer to this is that you're not really doing that. The backwards version is perfectly fine. And it seems to be so there's some tension there between the fundamental laws and the behavior of the universe as a whole. Why isn't the universe as a whole? Why doesn't it display this cyclic behavior, which is a feature of the underlying laws? And the best answer that I think one might come up with is that it does, but you just have to wait long enough. Right, so the universe is kind of special. So actually, this is a place where special conditions, maybe fine tuning, apply. So there's some specialness in the universe where if you look at the universe for a short period of time, it looks like the future is very different from the past. But that's just because the universe is special at certain moments in time, and you haven't waited long enough.
Right.
So I'm not sure if I'm confused.
No, that's it's all digesting. It's all good stuff. Yeah, well, see, I don't know if you have anything you want to say to that. I have kind of reasons that what Craig appeals to for this, but I guess I'll wait after the video makes the case for the second one, and you can start this.
Well, the one other thing I was going to add is that it's a composition division fallacy, right? To say that because things within the universe function a certain way, the universe as a whole must function the same. I think I've given this example in one of the debates we had on here, where I said every sheep in a flock has a mother, but you wouldn't say that the whole flock has a mother. So even if it was true that somehow within the universe cause and effect seem to operate in a real way, even if these things weren't emergent, that doesn't necessarily suggest that the universe must operate, that the totality of reality must operate in the same way.
No, I agree. I agree with that. I'm not sure that applies here, because we're talking about the laws of the universe.
Right.
So there wouldn't be a inferring the
right. You're not inferring the whole
based on the part.
Right.
Yeah.
You're just trying to identify the more general laws.
Mm-hmm.
You could always say, we're not there yet, and that's fine. But that the idea is that you're looking at the general laws, and if the general laws suggest something, then you want to pay attention to that.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So we'll continue this, and then I'll mention some of the points of why he holds to this premise before we get into 3.
It always existed. Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point.
If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now.
The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the redshift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of it.
To pause.
Yeah. Any comments?
Everything they're saying is reasonable, but right, there's a difference. So the universe, there's expansion, and the universe was very different in the past. And if you go further back, the universe got more and more ordered, and they brought the second law of thermodynamics into this. And this whole picture kind of fits into what I was saying before about the future being different from the past, but none of that this imposes on this framework that there must have been a t = 0.
Sure. Yeah. And so this actually goes right into the list of what he is appealing to. I didn't really vet this video. First, I vetted a different video, but
let me just point out that the past was very different from the future doesn't imply anything about. It doesn't force beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and so
you could infer it, I guess. Right? You could infer it, but you have to look at what the theory is telling you at t equals 0.
Okay,
Right?
and
You agree with that?
but
Yeah.
would you? And hopefully this is relevant. Would you say, because this is like one of his first points, is that the second law of thermodynamics, or the confirmation against the past infinite universe, is necessarily due to that? Is there any substance there?
So the second law of thermodynamics is telling us why the past is very different from the future on the larger scales, even on our scales, right? We notice this feature that the universe is very different from the past. The simple demonstration of that is if I make a movie of whatever's happening around us, I play it backwards, you notice the difference immediately.
Sure. So it's that same kind of.
But why does that tell us that the universe couldn't be infinite in the past? It doesn't do that.
Well, yeah, and that's his second point, is that the scientific evidence that the universe began to exist a finite time ago at the Big Bang.
There seems to be a time in the universe when things are a certain way, and the specialness of the way the universe was allows for a difference between the future and the past. The era of time in our universe is due to this special condition at a certain time, but that's different from saying, that's the beginning of the universe. So in a cyclic model, right, if it's true, if it's correct to think of the universe as cyclic, because the fundamental laws are cyclic, then we'll come back in the future to a time when the universe is like it was at the Big Bang.
Okay.
Right?
Would you? So I think he goes into the Vilenkin theorem, or the Guth-Vilenkin theorem. Are you familiar with that?
I mean, I know about it. Yeah.
It's the expanding he's kind of using it to say that that it basically, since it's been expanding throughout history, it cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a past space-time boundary.
Okay, so this is
that
a model.
point I have just jotted down in a note. It wasn't something I was familiar with. I just didn't know if you had a kind of a comment on that, or if that applies, because that's essentially what he's appealing to in the second premise is these kind of points that would make up that premise.
Yeah. So again, this is one model, has certain features. I don't know the details of the assumptions.
Sure.
They're not. I guess they're somewhat general. But it's one model. It doesn't. It's not a demonstration that you can't construct models where t equals 0 isn't the beginning.
Isn't the case? Yeah,
it's not a demonstration of that. It's not a proof of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so that's my thing. Is it seems like it's just really a priori like deductive argument. That's what he's trying to do.
If the universe, right,
he's trying to get to the actual infinities, not, or the impossibility of actual.
Right, you make it impossible, but you can't do that. Here's a model. If the universe behaves according to this model, then yes, the universe had a beginning. But that's just the model.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Yeah, the Vilenkin-Guth theory, that might, if anyone knows that and are listening, and I'm butchering it, I'm sorry.
Ruth Vilenkin.
Yes, yeah, that's I just have that down as kind of one of his sub premises for that premise, so to speak.
The finite.
Which I wanted to point out, and I think Graham Oppie does a good job at this. A lot of the problems I have with this is when you argue and you have premises and a conclusion, you're putting this down a syllogistic structure. I think that your premise should be such ironclad that you need no further explanation of it. It is just almost as true as it can be. Otherwise, your premise is just going to become an argument that I'm going to disagree with, and you're going to have to provide more reasons for the premise to begin with, right? And so it seems weird to me that all these things are nested within the premise that he makes, but you're going to have to make these side points about it that are all just kind of a priori deductive.
If you can't support your premises, then it's the argument doesn't. Even if it follows logically, it doesn't prove anything.
Well, yeah, it's just weird to say that they would follow when there's a lot that goes more into. It seems like a very basic premise on its head, but then once you really go into just even the first or second one, you start to see Craig's reasoning, and there's way more to that, which is not a problem in that sense, but it just seems that clearly you're going to have this issue where all I have to do is deny your premise, and that's it. I mean, as Graham Oppy says, I escape essentially, right? It's like it just seems to not be as ironclad as it could be, but.
So it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence, but one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, 3 leading cosmologists, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin.
I swear I have not seen this, so I'm just throwing that out there. I haven't seen this video yet. So
prove that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning.
This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing.
This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself,
its cause must be beyond the space-time universe.
All right. This is where we get into some shaky waters. I would just give my quickest opinion on this is where it gets turns into just a non sequitur. Like if we just agree with the premises, I don't know how we get to thinking being. But David, what's your kind of obviously we disputed the first 2 premises, so the conclusion's not going to follow necessarily. So we don't have to really get into that as much. But with where what I would call the non sequitur here, where they take that, what's your kind of thoughts on this?
Sorry, what's the third? Therefore, the universe has a cause? Right?
Yeah.
And that the cause has to be beyond space and time, because the universe can't cause itself.
Yeah, that's kind of like the thing, right? That I'm interested in, is that exact kind of point that Cease adds there.
I mean, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I mean, we have a track record of failing to be able to grasp what's real just by sitting down and making logical and consistent arguments, right? So even if you grant the assumptions, you could always say, well, we're just a certain kind of creature. There's no reason to expect that you can understand the fundamental nature of something like the beginning of the universe and the notion of things outside of space and time, right? I mean, you could say, oh, that sounds like a good argument, but I mean, you're talking about things that I'm not sure you even know that you're making sense, right? When you're talking about something like something outside of space and time, are we sure that we know that's a reasonable thing to think about? I'm not sure that I know what my ground is to talk about something.
That's
like
always
that.
been my issue. I don't think that sentence has much linguistic meaning. Like even if there was such a thing, like I know we've talked about space and time being emergent, so I to some degree I do struggle still with that concept as to what do we mean by fundamental reality. But when I think of the term existence, I struggle to see what sense it makes to talk about existence outside of the context in which we understand those words.
I'm not sure that we know that we're actually saying something meaningful. I don't, you can't. science. One of the great things about science is that we come up with all sorts of ideas. I've said this before. Your ideas might seem like great ideas, but at the end of the day, you have to figure out the only way to figure out what's true is to look at the universe and to then start to let what you observe. You have to square that with your ideas, right? So it's kind of like they're working with each other. They're pushing. You observe, and you have to try to observe and explain. But here, we're dealing with people who are in a realm where you basically don't have that anymore, and we know that we fail. We fail when we don't have observations. Like no one got us. We didn't get to relativity. We didn't get to quantum. It's the observations, looking at the world, that got us there with a lot of thinking, but when you just let thinking go on its own, completely unbridled, we don't have a good track record there. Sorry.
I want to address one comment, Chase. To be clear, Craig spends a great deal of time going into what this cause is, the gap problem. I doubt this video will expand on just what he thinks there are. Maybe a quick reason why. But my thing is this. I know Craig is very respected in his field, but and I've read some of his work. I'm not going to claim that I've read all of it, and I'll definitely be looking more into it. But there's a lot of flaws with his approach, both philosophically and certainly scientifically. He wants to claim that certain things are that way, like he's just stating it as having to be the case, and that's just ignoring the fact that we are not there scientifically, and this is why we bring you on to show that these are not, there's nothing conclusive there, unlike what he's trying to claim. And I urge anybody to watch the debate that Craig had with Sean Carroll. And I'm not even that much of a fan of Carroll, but when any time that Craig is actually dealing with an actual scientist, he doesn't get away with the kind of assumptions that he wants to pretend are facts. And there's
do you want to touch in on a couple of those assumptions that at least I could serve you some of those assumptions, so to speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Would you be referencing? Because this will kind of do with the beyond part, is that he kind of posits this beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and an enormously powerful being, right? Would you say, Cease, that's kind of what you're getting at? Is those types of assertions in the gap problem, or where are you specifically at?
Well, no, everywhere on the spectrum. It's the conclusion that what must have caused the universe has to be those things. I don't know what is meant by spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and all-powerful. These to me are just semi-poetic words. They're trying to define God into existence, as opposed to actually providing good reasons to believe in these things. Mm-hmm. But also the assumptions about, like we were saying earlier, causality, being more than emergent.
Gotcha.
And things that he said about physics in general. Like we were mentioning earlier, the first two premises don't follow the way that he wants them to.
Yeah. Let me throw something here out. Yeah, so I guess we could. I don't know if it's maybe premature. We could probably touch on a few more things here, but
I want to get to the 5 proofs.
Well, that's actually exactly where I was headed. So I didn't know if that was to say that this is jumping the gun, so to speak. But like we see Phaser kind of posit these ideas based off like Aristotelian logic, where past and future events are going to be potential rather than actual. And David, what I mean by that is like it's going to the candle that sits upon the table has the potentiality to be a pool of wax, right? But it has to actually be actualized in some way. It would be like being on having the fire or the wick on fire and causing the change from potential to actual. So he takes this idea that past and future events are potential rather than actual. And so I guess to cite Zion's paradox in some way, it's that this infinite past could exist in a similar way to how an infinite number of potential halfway points exist between two given points. That might go into the Thomist thing. I don't know if you guys want to chop in on that, or if you want to make your point with the Thomist thing that might relate to that whole thing there.
Well, I know we're going through this kind of generally, and we're going to devote more specifically like full episodes on each part of these arguments at some point. But for now, we're just sort of touching on these things a little bit.
So I'm sorry. Who is using Zeno's paradox as a way of showing that the past cannot be infinite? Something like that? Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's a kind of a typical the argument that you're going to get this the potential halfway points to that.
Okay, but Zeno's paradox is about the idea that motion is an illusion. It has nothing to do with the infinity of time. It's arguing that infinity, because infinity shows up in places like the distance from here to there, which is a finite distance, a meter, two things that are a meter apart. What Zeno's paradox is about is the infinity associated with that finite distance, arguing that, as you said, you start to divide space up, and so what you realize is that you have to cover an infinite number of subparts. Now this has been resolved with calculus, right? So there's a certain sequence in calculus that will get you the 1 meter distance, that you're crossing an infinite number of small little pieces, but you're doing so in tiny little intervals of time, and both the distance covered and the time it takes to cover that distance are finite. And this is sort of something done with calculus. So that's where Zeno's paradox comes into play, and I'm not sure why now it's being transplanted into as a criticism of the infinity of time in general. It seems to me I have to look at that. It doesn't seem to be related.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
That's arguing that there's an infinity of finite space and time, and therefore that motion is an illusion.
There's a strange thing that Craig does where he's talking about infinity being coherent and using infinity almost like a math number. Like he's saying you can't subtract infinity from infinity, you get incoherent results.
Yeah, well, I think it's the idea that that you would have, like, for the actual infinities, right? I guess this would be the criticism for it, is that the infinite past could exist in a similar way to how an infinite number of the potential halfway points, right? So what I think in that sense, like, because you're saying it's from point to point, not segment to segment, or did I hear you wrong? I want to kind of, David.
You pick a finite distance and try to figure out how you're going to cross that finite distance. You have to cross half that distance first. But to cross that half distance, you have to cross half of that half, and so on. And so what you realize is that you have to cross an infinite number, because you can keep dividing each part into a half, and so you end up with an infinite number of little pieces that you have to cross. And that's sort of an argument for why you can't move at all, because you would have to cross an infinite number of pieces.
But okay, what sense does it make to subtract infinity from infinity?
Look, infinity is a weird kind of thing, but it's extremely powerful and useful in math and physics. What's the ontological status of that idea? Does it bother people? Sure, but again, you want to just sit down and think about whether this idea, you want to just dismiss this idea on what grounds? I don't know. Infinity is extremely useful in so much of what we do in physics. But yes, I don't see infinity in front of me. I can't handle infinity. I can handle it. Mathematicians can handle infinity in different ways, and they, depending on how clever they are. I'll grant you that I have trouble with infinity, but does that mean that is that my limitation? Do I just then,
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
These aren't demonstrations that things can't be a certain way.
Hmm.
Yeah, I wish I had the quote that was talking about the subtracting of infinity from infinity. Because I think
he says if you subtract an infinity from an infinity, you get infinity, right? Is what he was saying, or something. I don't remember I know the clip that we were looking at. I can't remember. This is where my brain starts to melt when we get into these kind of things. It's just not my thing.
we can always go back to it at some other time. Yeah, did you want to?
Perfectly normal ways of dividing infinity by infinity and getting the number 3.
Right.
Then there are other ways of dividing infinity by infinity and getting infinity.
Yeah, and I think Mark makes a point, right? I mean, the correct point that what Craig's trying to do at least is pointing out that it's absurd. It's just, but are those even is that even a logical, like, a priori argument to deduce that that's the case, right? That's kind of the issue there. But
Mike, should we go into the 5 proofs and see?
Yeah, yeah. I was trying to fumble on my notes there. If you have that ready, or anything you want to mention there, I can try to get a graphic up or something.
Yeah, well, no, I can just read it, and
cool, okay.
I'll read it point by point, and then we can go into the Thomist aspect of the conversation, and then I have a couple questions left.
Sure, yeah, and one last thing I would mention, because I saw Mark actually post about Hilbert's Hotel. That was actually something too that was kind of in that thing, was the assertion of this metaphysical impossibility of an actual infinite series of past events through the Hilbert Hotel thought experiment. But that's just something that if you guys want to touch on before, then we can, or we can touch on it later, or just not at all. But we can move into the 5 points.
No, you can do that. You can do it first.
No, that's fine. We'll just go into that, and I'll write a little note there to make sure I go back to it.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I do want to deal with that question for sure.
Sure.
Okay, so the first proof of St. Aquinas is the following. It's called the argument from motion, and it says this: our senses can perceive motion by seeing the things act on one another. Whatever moves is moved by something else. Consequently, there must be a first mover that creates this chain reaction of motions. This is God. God sets all things in motion and gives them their potential. So what would you say to that?
I would say that we've dealt with this thing already. It shows up in a different version in the Kalam, right? Isn't it the same thing?
It's a little bit, it's a little bit different, but yeah, I mean, it's connected, I guess. But I mean, I guess what I would say is that doesn't relativity do away with this notion of motion, like having a starting point? Like, isn't it all relative to something else?
I'm not sure I see the issue with relativity. He's talking about cause and effect being fundamental, right there, and then you just go back, and everything must be caused by something. And every effect it has a cause, and so when you go back to the beginning, you can't go to infinity with that, and you have to have a first cause, right? And then you jump and say that first cause is this.
Right. I guess, yeah, that makes sense. Well, it's weird because then the second proof is talking about cause again as well. It says that the argument from efficient cause, because nothing can cause itself, everything must have a cause, and something that creates an effect on another thing without a first cause, there would be no others. Therefore, the first cause is God. So I don't know why he's making a distinction here between this argument from motion.
The reason why we can say, look, these kinds of arguments only go so far. You can agree that some of them might seem reasonable. I'm not sure that this one seems reasonable. But right, so when you start thinking in terms of cause and effect, you observe that, but then you look at physics more deeply and you realize that isn't something fundamental. There's a lesson there, right? That lesson, I think, is let's be a little bit more careful with our arguments. It doesn't hold up. right? You don't want to have arguments in terms of cause and effect being fundamental, because in physics they don't. They're not fundamental. They disappear. And so, if you want to, relativity sort of fits in with this, right? An analogy for relativity is, the story of the universe is there in the book. It's like a book, and you wouldn't say that the pages, page 7 causes page 8, right? They're just there in the book. Although if you read them, and if you read the pages, in sequence, a story emerges, and cause and effect emerges from the story, right? The character gets pushed by another character and falls in the river, right? So these things happen on different pages, but you wouldn't say fundamentally that one page is the cause of another page. That's sort of the analogy. When you're looking more deeply at what's there, it's just the book. It's the pages. That's the fundamental thing. And the idea that you get from reading that's sort of the emergent property of cause and effect. And so why have these conversations about cause and effect when they're, emergent properties? They're not fundamental properties. Unless, and it seems to me that, you want to base God on something fundamental about the universe, right? God doesn't, you don't want a notion of God that's not, you don't want your God to be unaware of the universe in which
that he's supposedly created.
Right.
So I'll read the third proof. And again, we're only going into this very generally. We'll dedicate more time in the future, but this is just a little taste for what's to come. But the next one is the argument from necessary being. Because objects in the world come into existence and pass out of it, it is possible for those objects to exist or not exist at any particular time. However, nothing can come from nothing. That means something must exist at all times. This is God. So again, I think we covered this, actually, now that I'm thinking about it.
You addressed this one.
Yeah, and I will also say there's no reason to call it God. Like, even if there had to be,
if you grant everything, then
even if the universe needed a necessary foundation of sorts, like there had to be something necessary to it. Why couldn't that be a natural explanation? Yeah. Or even if it was a supernatural explanation, why does it have to be a God or a mind or like? The assumptions, again, they're trying to sneak and define God into existence by saying that it couldn't have been otherwise, but there's no reason for that. There's no. These are just, claims. I'll read the next one. The argument from gradation. There are different degrees of goodness in different things. Following the great chain of being, which states that there is a gradual increase in complexity, created objects move from unformed inorganic matter to biologically complex organisms. Therefore, there must be a being of the highest form of good. This perfect being is God. David, you want to take it first, or?
I don't understand how you made that leap.
Right.
It's like saying that. Isn't that the equivalent of saying we don't understand biological evolution in the context of the second law? Isn't that what ultimately it says?
Yeah, from my understanding, there's no evidence in science that points that the complexity must have a designer of any kind. And in terms of goodness or perfection, I think these are completely meaningless words. They have no content to them. What are we comparing it to? Like, what does it mean to say maximally great?
Well, are they getting at the idea that things are getting what's the word? That in biological evolution, things are becoming more and more perfect? Is that the kind of idea? Because we know now that that's not the path of biological organisms, right? They're not improving linearly. There's all sorts of
we're all going to the best being that we can possibly be. Yeah, that's like the biggest misconception that people make.
Right.
And
That's the
also,
impression I got, that they were saying that.
and also that everything is getting more complex, and somehow they're tying in this notion of goodness and complexity.
Yeah, but I don't see how they go hand in hand at all.
But I don't see, are things even getting more complex? Is that even the case?
So complexity is a feature of the universe, right? So entropy is increasing, and there's a phase when you'll get complexity, and then so that doesn't just increase with entropy; it increases at some point, and then decreases. I have to think about that a little bit, but it's not
An increasing.
it's not like entropy. It's
Right.
You have a phase where you can get complex structures. So one way to think about this is in a very simple way, right? To understand the difference between entropy and complexity. I think I'm not an expert on this, but you have a box of balls, blue and red balls, right? And you maybe 1,000 balls, and you put 500 of them. You stack them up on one side of the box, and 500 five blue ones, 500 blue ones on one side, and 500 red ones on the other side. And that's a very orderly universe, right? This box universe. And then you start to shake this box, and the shaking kind of represents the laws of physics. And what's going to happen? Well, you're going to start mixing the boxes, and you'll start to notice little spots where there's some blue and some red, and you'll get some very interesting complex patterns, right? And little places where you have certain combinations of blue, 5 blues and 2 reds, or and vice versa, and things like that. But if you keep on shaking this, eventually you'll get a complete random distribution where it's basically the same everywhere, and no interesting complexity. It's just blue and red sort of equal in every location.
Right.
So the complexity has decreased.
Right.
And the entropy has increased. So the entropy there is increasing over time, constantly. We haven't defined entropy, but that's a simple way of seeing, I think, entropy increasing and complexity increasing and then decreasing.
I'll read the last one. The argument from design: all things have an order or arrangement that leads them to a particular goal. Because the order of the universe cannot be the result of chance, design and purpose must be at work. This implies divine intelligence on the part of the designer. This is God.
This seems like the intelligent design argument ultimately, but we know how intelligent design claims have been debunked, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Shout out! We'll be doing an episode on that within a day or two. So.
But it's if you go back in time, it seems like a good idea, right? You could concede that, right? But then you look at what we learn from science, and that it no longer is, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that we don't see, like, even the order and the disorder that we see. There's no reason to assume that is put in place by anything. It can be just a fact of nature. And
Well, you might argue that it's kind of hard to see how nature produces the kinds of things that it produces, right?
Sure.
You don't look at nature and say, biological evolution. The pressures in the environment are clearly responsible for these kinds of things.
Yeah.
You need to look pretty deeply at things to notice that, right?
Yeah, but that's the point. Like, these things can seem to make sense on the surface, but it's the moment you actually start to observe things on a deeper level, you start to recognize that no, this is actually not the case.
All I'm saying is that intelligent design is a sort of a natural common sense conclusion.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
Well, I think it's based on a fallacy anyway. So, but yes, common sense. Yeah, but I consider it to be
the fallacy that you extrapolate something from looking locally at things. You made the watch, you extrapolate that kind of thing.
and also a fallacy of.
But if you look at
thinking
your
that-
if you look at your teeth, they're trying to actively kill you. You know, so that's probably one thing to think it's not. You know, but that's my pessimistic mind. So
No, but also the fallacy of thinking that just because two things share a common quality, that they must, share more. It's like
Right.
that doesn't follow. So, Mike, do you want
What's the name
to?
of that fallacy?
I honestly I can't remember at the moment.
what getting from just you're talking about from it would just be an argument from incredulity or ignorance if you're just going to assert the case.
No, there's another name for particularly the claiming that two things must, if they have one quality, they must share all qualities. But I forget what the name of it is.
Oh, okay.
But Mike, do you want to jump into the sort of the more Thomist perspectives about potentiality and all of that?
Yeah, we can. We're doing a video on that at some point here soon, so we'll get more in depth on that because the Thomists don't ever seem to be happy with the atheist responses and that they're always missing something. Yeah, I guess there's a lot you could touch in that. Like, so I wouldn't probably get into essence or things like that because that would just be getting more to the philosophical aspect of what that would even mean. And I'm not sure David's kind of view on like philosophy of mathematics or being like a nominalist or things like that.
I don't even know what Thomism is actually.
It's from Saint Thomas Aquinas, who was like a medieval.
No, I know who he was. Yes.
Yeah, he kind of bridged off the Aristotelian arguments for God, and then Phaser is kind of the like Aquinas of our time in the sense of that he's kind of rephrased these arguments. I guess the Phaserian, if you want to call arguments for God or something. Yeah, no, I think the Thomist thing. I think you guys are pretty good on that. The only thing I would go into on that would be kind of what I had said initially about the potentiality and the actual case, which I think we touched upon. But since my hesitance is that since David isn't really familiar with the Thomist arguments, I don't know how fruitful it would be for me to try to explain them since they are kind of difficult with the wording of like potentiality and actuality and the fact that it would actualize itself. But it's essentially going to be on this idea of the unmoved mover, the thing that is causing everything that is going to essentially be an unactualized actualizer, if that wording makes any sense.
Potentiality and actuality and potentiality suggests that these things are happening in time, that there's a connection in time. There's some sort of theory of time behind this.
Yeah, so it's depending on which angle you look at, it's going to be propped up in a lot of different ways for that. But yeah, especially with like Aristotelian, which is why I kind of think the whole thing from the get-go is flawed because the system of physics it relies upon is just not. It's just outdated. It's just not what we see in that realm. They're very, and Thomas would disagree with me, but they're very black and white cause and effect reality, where it's not as zoomed in, where you don't have that kind of causal principle dissipating at like the subatomic level in that sense, right? Like, so they're kind of on this idea. I think I used the candle. It's usually the typical example where you can basically have a candle has the potentiality of being a pool of wax, right? And then that's always going to have this essence of like potentiality within it. It won't be actualized until there is something to actually actualize that potentiality, meaning like to actually take the potential of the wax and actualize that to being the case. And so the thing at the very bottom root here is going to be the thing that is I guess pure actualization, right? That can't be actualized. If I'm using the terminology, I'm sure Thomists are freaking out if I'm not, but I think that would sum up a.
Okay, so I'm wondering what this seems to be in some tension with the block universe of relativity. Right.
I mean, I guess in some ways, I mean, I know Craig, at least his kind of thing, he holds to like presentism or what is that a theory of time?
How does he square that with relativity?
I don't know. I haven't really gone that far into it. I wish I would have actually had that in there. But what I do kind of I do have a quote from him, I believe, on that. Let me see. Here we go. So from start to finish, the Kalam cosmological argument. I know we just shifted off Thomism there, but since he brought up the theory of time, maybe we can get it in there somehow. From start to finish, the Kalam cosmological argument is predicated upon a theory of time. On a B theory of time, the universe does not, in fact, come into being or become actual at the Big Bang. It just exists tenselessly as a four-dimensional space-time block that is finitely extended in the earlier than direction. If time is tenseless, then the universe never really comes into being, and therefore the quest for cause of coming into its being is misconceived.
So, I actually don't see that there's a problem with the notion of the beginning of time in a tenseless theory of time. In fact, the Vilenkin-Guth board model is certainly compatible with relativity, and yet they're saying time has a beginning. So, I'm not sure why. And he's for that model. So I'm not sure why he's for an A theory of time.
So would you say?
Sorry, go ahead.
Would you say that these perspectives are fundamentally not really understanding the role that relativity in modern physics
Well, I don't know that. It seems my impression is that Craig understands these basic ideas of relativity, and so he should be aware that it's compatible with the notion of the beginning of time, and we should be able to find that somewhere. I'm sure we will find that somewhere if we look.
So one question.
I doubt he's things are breaking down at that level. I'm not sure why he prefers one, but maybe it's just a preference.
Because I got a question for Dave. Well, I guess we'll move into some questions now with that, or if you guys want to go into I don't have very many notes on I have that quote. I didn't know if we would break down into that. There's a lot of content on here with this, so maybe we can have a part 2 and really dive into those. Sure. I know, David, you've already been gracious enough to come on, and you've in fact been the most viewed guest that we've had, and so we really appreciate that from multiple aspects.
Thank you guys for inviting me.
I do have a few questions left before you go, but here's a first from Kat. Question for David: what would be your argument? There has to be an ultimate being that created everything.
Yeah, I think we sort of broke that down in different ways at different levels, and we first argued that cause and effect isn't fundamental, and so you don't want to think that way. And even if we concede that, it's a good way to think about things at the beginning of the universe. That doesn't then imply anything about the cause.
Right.
So there are two things there that we concluded.
So I wanted to read you a couple questions that I've gotten recently. One was from a theist friend of mine who said the following about determinism and free will, and I want you to react to this. He said this. So in quotes, if free will doesn't exist and we are all determined, I found out by looking at the evidence and making a rational decision. He claims that this statement is undercut by the notion that if I was determined to come to that conclusion, then I didn't really use reason. I didn't reason my way to that conclusion. I just think I did. So he's claiming that if we are determined, then reason isn't really a factor in the way that we discern these things.
Yeah, I don't see why that follows at all. I've heard that before. I see that, but it's a little bit like, imagine that you are actually in I'm not sure if this is going to work, but imagine that free will does exist, and that you make a movie that captures all of what happens in the brain of a person that's thinking and consciously making a choice. And then you have this movie, and that movie, you can play that movie over and over again. And obviously in the movie, there's no free will. It's all just fixed and determined. Yet the individual is doing the things in the movie because of the reasons. And those reasons affect the brain in some way. Once you have a record of that, isn't that the same kind of thing? So I'm not sure that that's a good, I think it's just it doesn't follow.
I don't see why.
Is good.
I don't see why rationality can't itself be a kind of cause in this context.
Right.
So a couple more questions from the audience. Do you have a cyclic model you favor?
I don't favor anything. I don't like dark energy. I don't like the idea that the universe is very different in the future. That's, as soon as that came out, I was a student, and that just made me a little nauseous. And I'm hoping that goes away.
Right.
Because I think the lesson from the laws of physics is what I said before. And that seems to not fit with that.
What would be your opinion on the statement that caused equals determined?
Cause is equal to determined.
Right.
I think that the word determined, I mean, you can use, I don't think they're equal to each other, right? This is semantic.
Wouldn't it be fair to say that the determined aspect is going to be like the tail end of whatever the cause is, right? It's not going to be synonymous with the entire.
It's not It's not synonymous.
Right.
I don't think it's synonymous.
And the last one.
That's a good question, though. It kind of makes you think. You're like, wait,
two more. One here, which I'm not sure I quite understand. Dealing with the irrationality or rationality if you determined.
I think he misspoke or mistyped. Dealing with the irrationality of rationality if you are determined. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't see what is irrational about.
It's perfectly reasonable to imagine an irrational determined being, right?
An irrational or rational?
An irrational.
But no, but I think they're talking about how we arrive at conclusions, and can we say that we're really using reason if we're just determined to think a certain thing? But like you were saying, why couldn't our capacity to reason,
whether we're making sense or not, I'm not sure. I don't see why that has to do with whether things are determined, right? I don't see that that's in any way related to that. Whether you have free will or not, you may or may not be making sense.
Yeah, I'm not sure that. This is why I was hoping that maybe you might understand the question, because I don't think I fully got it. Like, why this idea of determinism would undercut rationality being a tool? Because we could be determined to have rationality, right?
Right. Whatever, all of these features in a determined world are also determined.
Right.
They're not. They don't vanish. Right.
And the last question that I have, and I don't know if the audience have any more.
There's one more that came in after yours.
The one thing. Where is it?
Scott Williamson.
Well, you read that one first. I'm looking at my phone for.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no worries.
Saved.
I'm going to go ahead and say that, by the way, we are 2 away from 400 subs. I just want to make sure I don't forget that. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate that. With the lack of promoting we've done, we're surprised we've gotten there. So that's really cool. But anyway, what does the Big Bell test of 2016 tell us about free will and local realism? Are you familiar with the Big Bell test of 2016?
Big Bell test.
I was trying to think of what that is.
I think this is just a further confirmation of the Bell inequality, which, as we discussed in the last time, basically says there are no hidden variables and superpositions are the complete state of the system.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lack of hidden variables, which on the Inspiring Mind video, whatever that was that we talked about, they wanted to use that to claim lack of reality for physical state, lack of materialism.
Here's the question for you. If we're all the premise.
I'm sorry, I don't know that I answered the question, right? What does it tell us about free will and local realism? I don't think anything. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's telling us. I don't think there's anything deep about what you do with a quantum system. None of that has anything to do with us. I don't think that's.
I think we touch upon some of that in the last episodes, the first episode and the second episode. So, Scott, if you're interested in this, or if this interests you at all, there's 2 more episodes with David, the very first one, and then somewhere sandwiched in the middle. So you go.
Yeah, but he uses the word local realism. I think the point to take away from our discussion last time was that if you conclude, and again, the premises are not. We shouldn't grant them the premises, but if you grant them all the premises in that video, and that the state is unreal prior to measurement, and that consciousness does the collapsing, you still end up in the same place. You have an unreal state, because that's a feature of quantum physics. So unfixed quantities. If they want to say that's not real, then you're always in an unreal world, and consciousness doesn't change that. Mm-hmm. Whatever that means.
Sure. So his response, real quick, I'll just throw this out there. He says the test involved free will choices. I'm looking at some things on there, but I haven't seen anything on that. So I'm sorry, I'm a noob on this. But and it showed the free will choices were not determined. He says he thinks. I guess maybe we're all a little gray.
I think you're talking about those delayed choice experiments. But now we're having a conversation about what you choose to do in the experiment, and but we're determined. If we're having a conversation about whether we're determined or not, we're determined.
Sure. Well, what I'm seeing on it is that the experiment shows the possibility of observing Bell correlations in the macroscopic regime. I don't know what that necessarily means or the implications of that, but if that's kind of what he's alluding to, then maybe there's something there that it's going way over my head. I'll tell you that.
So. The last thing I'll ask you is the following. This person says that if consciousness is just another random determined state, that we have no objective measure to differentiate the different arrangements of random chemicals. How do we find value or meaning, or also how do we talk about objective reality if all we have to operate on are just random chemicals?
The impression is there are a lot of different things there, and there's also the question of how do we understand the world. And I think that once you look at the brain, it's amazing that we can make sense of anything at all. I think that's a fair conclusion. I'm not a neuroscientist, but when you look at you start studying neuroscience a little bit, you're amazing. You're amazed by there's something called the astonishing hypothesis, and it's just amazing that there's any connection in our heads. We can make any connection with the outside world, but that connection isn't one to one. There are all sorts of amazing experiments that show that we're not really seeing what's out there in any one to one way. Right? We're tricked in all sorts of ways. That was one aspect of the question.
And that's the thing. Like I can even acknowledge the fact that we don't have access to, fully to ontology, but doesn't mean that just because we're in a brain state, that we're not deriving any kind of truth from the condition that we're in, because that's assuming that all there is the brain state, as opposed to the brain state being as a result of us coming into contact with reality, right?
Yeah, this is part of why I think we can't just sit down and get at truth by thinking, because of what we are ultimately, and we need to get around our intuitions. Our intuitions are created by the environment in which we're in, right, and the kinds of things that brains are made of. and they're limited in that respect. And we need all sorts of other ways to get at things, get behind our intuitions, and that's why science is so powerful. We can't just get there by thinking our way through things. And that's why I'm always skeptical about these attempts to get at the ultimate nature of the universe through just pure thinking.
Yeah, and I would say, as far as the question of value, again, the language is secondary. So when I'm describing why an experience is better than another, I'm like, I don't need some kind of metaphysical justification. I'm describing what it's like
in the experience.
In the experience, and then constructing a language to point to a difference in experience. And there's no reason to think that is entirely relative from person to person if you believe there's such a thing as human nature, or that consciousness itself.
Yeah, it seems strange that you have this idea that you would prefer, like you have a good state, what we would define as a good state, right? And then another state that's not as good, right? It seems weird to me that you would have to need or presuppose this idea where you couldn't differentiate that from the experience alone without any form of language, right? Like that seems to always kind of be the baseline there. And when people present an argument to you against that, or myself against that, I'm always very confused on like how they miss that axiom of the experience to begin with.
Yeah, because it's not like, the baby that can't speak or doesn't know logic, like if it gets hurt, it's gonna cry. Like like it doesn't need to possess a language to gather something from the experience itself. Like the language, the descriptions are secondary. Yeah. So
no, I'm my position is that this value is a very subjective space. Sorry, objective.
Objective.
It's a space of objective truths. Yes, it may be complicated, but it's not subjective. It's
right.
So you wouldn't have some issues with like the normative kind of claims from descriptive, or what they call the is-ought distinctions of kind of being.
I don't think there is any distinction, right? I think ought is a kind of is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're all in agreement there. That's nice. First time I've been in a room with three people that don't hold to the distinction.
So many people in philosophy and outside of that would cringe at our response, but.
Oh yeah, it's like people freak out when they hear that, but and my rebuttal to it might not be maybe as sophisticated as your guys, or maybe even correct in the assessment of it for all I know, but it appears to me, and people kind of accuse me of this like Randism, like Ayn Rand type of way of doing it, but I do agree in the sense of that that the idea of value is only inherent with life itself. Like you don't have this concept at all, and so where what you ought to do to maximize that really comes very logically comes after that. You just sit in a chair for 10 hours, right? Well, if the value is only coming from life and I'm hungry and I just continue to sit, right? Well, I ought to go get my ass up and eat some food to sustain the life so that I have the value. It just doesn't seem to be a very hard concept to me to grasp. It seems that I ought to act this way, or else I don't exist and value is not a thing anymore. But I mean, maybe
I was amazed when I first learned of this. What is it called? Dichotomy, distinction.
Yeah, the is-ought problem.
Deriving normative claims from descriptive claims. But yeah, it's like you can't. I don't know if it's Harris or someone uses a good example that I think is probably one of the better examples, is that you don't need these, like, there's no concerns about these oughts in the realm of science with treating like people, right? Like we didn't need this to be presented as a problem to create a science of medicine, right? Like it wasn't like, ought we heal people in some ways? Like, no, that was not really needed in some basis of that dispute. It was like, it was purely, if we want to do this, we ought this, and then there's the science of medicine out of the ashes of that, right? So it seems weird to me that is a distinction as well too, and that science can't be in the business of these oughts when it's clearly grounded from the beginning with why ought you even do these sciences in the first place, right?
But you don't have to perfectly justify the foundation, right?
In the context of the value, Jim asks this: objective as far as measurable or universal?
I think both.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. All right.
Well, yeah, I guess that would be all the questions there. I mean, unless there's anything you guys want to touch upon, I think it was a really good episode. It seems every time we do one, it's always climbing up the hill. It's always fun. So
Yeah, thank you guys. Keep up the good work.
yeah, thank you.
We'll have you back soon. I feel like the episodes where you're here are probably my favorite.
Yeah, same here.
It's going for me. So
I have fun watching you guys dealing with all sorts of different issues. If only you let me know more consistently.
Yeah.
When you're suddenly I'm putting my daughter to bed and I see Axioms on trial and you guys have started already.
Yeah,
we have to get better at organizing what we're doing.
Right?
That'll be in the future. We'll look like myself without the suit versus with the suit. We'll clean up real well. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, guys, yeah, we do appreciate it. Like always, I'm gonna pass it to Cease for a couple more points if he needs to elaborate on anything. But we might be going live tomorrow if everything works out well. If it's not, tomorrow on the evolution intelligent design aspect, we'll probably be around the whether intelligent design is falsifiable topic. If that's not tomorrow, it'll be on the 3rd or the 4th, somewhere around there. But yeah, just look out for that. And Cease, anything that you want to say, we'll close it out with you.
Well, thanks everyone that is supporting us and tuning in, and I hope everyone had a great New Year's Eve, and hopefully 2021 will be a better year for everyone. So
Agreed. All right, guys, much love, take care, and
thanks, guys.
Honestly, unrelated, tell everybody around you. I've there's people that we've lost, especially with COVID and even non-COVID related things, but you are not guaranteed tomorrow, and you're not guaranteed that you're going to wake up in some eternal realm to be able to hang out with these people. Just hug and love the people around you. Don't do it for any other reason than they need to hear it potentially before you go. I think this one of the most valuable things that you can do is express to people around you that you love them and that you care about them before it's too late. Sorry, but
shout out to the guys at Tarth and all the other atheist channel and creators.
Of course. Yeah, EA, Empathetic Atheist, Roundtable, all those guys. All right, guys. Much love. Peace.
Good night.